there's something insane that happened recently that was brought to my attention that I'm kind of surprised isn't a bigger deal. As you can tell by the way I'm raising my voice.
COVID lab run by a shady Chinese company has been discovered in the town of Raleigh in California.
There is a secret that haunts the soil of a small town in the American state of California.
An investigation tonight into a possible illegal medical lab. It was operating out of an abandoned warehouse in Reedley. Inside, mice bioengineered to incubate the COVID-19 virus.
A secret lab attempting to breed scientific breakthroughs through means that one might question as immoral or illegal.
30 refrigerators and freezers, some broken, were found filled with bodily fluids.
Now, this secret lab isn't exactly the cool illegal secret lab. There's no sort of aliens or dark matter or... Aww. This lab had diseases, way worse, way less fun, and it was funded by the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party.
老干妈，老干妈，老干妈，细了花梗老干妈。
That's right, in Reedley, California. What the f?
An investigation by the Fresno County Department of Public Health uncovered a secret biological lab which had 30 freezers. Over 800 biological materials and chemicals were discovered on the site, including blood, tissues, and other bodily fluids.
The diseases in this biolab were incredibly dangerous. We can go through the Rolodex of incredibly dangerous diseases, and chances are it was in Reedley, California. Plus, the diseases in this biolab had little to no safeguards to protect the public from another possible outbreak. There's the Wuhan theory, the Wuhan biolab theory, Ukrainian, I don't know, I'm not gonna get into There's a lot of crazy theories as to the origin of COVID-19, and this seems like it could cause something like that, more reasonably so than eating a bat or whatever. COVID 2.0, that's the fear, at least. I don't actually know how the transmission of diseases works because I'm a YouTuber and infantile comedy is my specialty.
Firstly, mode of transmission. This can be through direct contact, indirect contact, respiratory droplets, airborne, vector-borne, fecal-oral, bloodborne, and vertical transmission, which is from mother to child.
The craziest part about this big drama situation is that it was not really covered by that many news outlets, and the news outlets that did cover it, they didn't do very well. It didn't perform that well, which means they don't care. Okay, guys, that means they don't give a fuck. So I'm gonna work really hard to get this video to be as clickable as possible to spread awareness, because that's the kind of guy I am. It's a long story. It's incredibly interesting, and it's very worrisome because this thing is a thing that is going on in America, and a lot of people don't know, most people don't know about it. About 500,000 people who watch these shitty videos know about it. So, how was the lab discovered? How does one discover that there is a top secret Chinese communist illegal biolab doing scientific tests in Reedley, California? It starts with bureaucracy, believe it or not. What? This is awesome. In December 2022, a code enforcement officer found a green garden hose sticking out the side of a wall. It was literally a hole drilled into a wall with a garden hose coming out of it. And this was seen on the side of a warehouse in Reedley, California. It could be a meth lab, whatever. Meth labs are not uncommon in that part of California. Look at that green, that is suspicious looking. I mean, I've got to say, look at that green garden hose right there, dude. Biolab, didn't see that coming, I bet. By the way, Reedley, California is a small rural town located about 30 minutes outside of Fresno. The lab was discovered in an unoccupied warehouse that was essentially in the backyard of City Hall, which is a ironic place to put an illegal lab, like behind a fucking police station.
In December 2022, Code Enforcement Officer Jesselyn Harper noticed a green garden hose sticking out of the side of a warehouse in the small town of Reedley, California. The hose was a clear violation of the city's building code, so Officer Harper showed her badge and entered the warehouse.
Prestige Biological Lab, just behind the City of Reedley Police Dispatch and City Hall. The place was discovered by a code enforcement officer named Jesselyn. Immediately upon identifying the green garden hose, she went to the front of the warehouse, knocked on the door, identified herself, and asked to be let inside to enter the site to see what was going on, basically, because it's very suspicious. Jesselyn was allowed entry into the warehouse, where she was met by 3 women, all 3 PRC nationals. That's the People's Republic of China. Crazy side note on this, by the way, Jessalyn had only been a code enforcement officer for a few months at this point. So I feel like that's pretty impressive for her to just kind of immediately crack something this big open as a code enforcement officer. Has there ever been a time when a code enforcement officer... Nah, I'm not going to talk shit about... I'm sorry. I'm just making jokes. Inside of the lab, there was an overwhelming amount of equipment, packaging equipment, science lab type shit. Think Dexter's laboratory.
Inside the vast, dimly lit building, she found laboratory equipment, manufacturing devices, dangerous chemicals, and medical-grade freezers and containment units holding thousands of vials of biological substances.
But also with MDMA, cocaine, meth, THC, and amphetamines there as well. They found drugs in the freezer. Look at all these illegal drug. Oh my God. What the heck? This looks like my spice drawer, but instead of spices, it's drugs. There was a ton of freezers in the building. Medical grade, some you can buy them at Walmart. Within these freezers, Jessalyn found a bunch of vials with just strange biological substances. Very odd. The consistency in labeling was non-existent. Some had English labels, some had Mandarin labels, many had no labels at all. Blood and fluids, just mislabeled. Could be seasonings for all we know. I don't fucking know. That's what my spice cabinet looks like.
Some of these vials were unlabeled. Some were labeled in Mandarin. Others in a code that no one ever deciphered. Others were in English, with names of pathogens that Officer Parker did recognize, like HIV.
It's kind of bad to do this. Having a food manufacturing company, I'm gonna say, is a lot different than having a biolab, but you have to be very consistent with labeling. You can't joke around with compliance. Sure, I'm not a PRC national, and I'm not here to do some evil bidding in an American small town. I just have a candy company. You should go to sour.gg and sign up for our email list to be notified of new flavors. We have a new flavor dropping this week, potentially next week at the latest, but soon. Anyway, you can't just do that. You have to label stuff. You have to have consistency. You have to have good books, not just in terms of finances. If you're dealing with anything at all, you have to. There were 30 refrigerators full of this shit in that building. One such label Jessalyn had read said HIV. Not good. Others were similar pathogens. There were bacterial agents there, viral agents, hepatitis B, rubella, dengue fever. What the E. coli, bacteria moment, chlamydia, also malaria. So there was a little parasite there as well. Pretty awesome.
Experts determined that at least 20 potentially infectious, viral, bacterial, and parasitic agents were being stored inadequately, including E. coli, malaria, and even COVID.
By the way, this list right here was a list compiled by the CDC using only the labeled samples. The CDC did not test samples to see if the labels were accurate, and they did not test the coded samples, nor did they test the samples without labels.
Reedley City officials reached out to relevant law enforcement, public health, and regulatory officials about their shocking discovery. The FBI declined to investigate. The CDC refused to speak to them, and on multiple occasions, hung up on local officials mid-conversation.
God, I'm so glad the Center for Disease Control, once again, has humanity's best interest and the people of Reedley's best interest in hand in doing their due diligence in this completely not a big deal case. They completely did exactly what they should have 100% done. Holy shit. It's crazy they had code, though, on some of these samples. They had codes. It was Mandarin symbols with certain English letters and numbers. They couldn't find the key to crack the code because they clearly, the people at this lab warehouse didn't want any proof of whatever was in these samples to be on the exterior so people could identify it. Why not just not label it at all? Well, maybe it's incredibly important and it needs to be labeled. I don't know. Very strange, though. What were they doing with all these fucking random samples? Well, they were conducting various experiments because they were kind of like scientists or something. The code officer's next shocking discovery is what they were testing these samples on. She continued deeper into the lab after finding all this shit, past more lab equipment, more refrigerators, more freezers, etc., and she found a room that was being used for the storage of approximately 1,000 mice.
Mice used for research of human disease, which biolab workers told them were, quote, genetically engineered to catch and carry the COVID-19 virus.
They're like that guy in I Am Legend with the mice, and he makes the fucking crazy mouse. Or it's a rat, I guess.
It's a rat! Oh, shit! A rat!
By the way, if you even care, the mice were kept in very inhumane conditions. They were crowded together, poorly taken care of. They had frayed hair. They looked terrible, all right? They had little swollen, rotten paunches, little bellies. It's very sad. They were transgenic mice as well. By the way, that means a mouse that has been genetically modified, bred to more closely simulate the human immune system for the sole purpose of experimentation. That's what a transgenic mouse is. So in essence, we have individuals who identify themselves as nationals of the PRC who were testing drugs and pathogens of various kinds, degrees, and risks on mice that were genetically modified to simulate the human immune system. And, you know, surely that can't be good, right? They also were doing this all horribly, like so badly. And maybe if they did a better job, we'd be able to know more so of what they had in their little warehouse. Or maybe if we had a government body that was literally designed to prevent shit like this from happening. A little frustrating that the CDC wasn't able to do much, and the local officials of Reedley were also frustrated because they could not properly assess the level of danger that the lab posed on their small town, because it's a community and there's a lot of dangerous pathogens. Lots and lots of them. Some of them aren't even fucking labeled. They got the plague in that. The CDC even went as far as to refuse to test even one random sample. That's fucking insane.
The CDC refused to test the samples or examine the unlabeled vials containing what appeared to be pathogens or other biological samples. city officials repeatedly requested and even offered to pay for the testing, but the CDC still refused.
Local officials even offered to pay to have the samples tested, even with their limited budget compared to a gigantic, overinflated organization like the CDC. I don't really know if it's overinflated. I'm just starting to maybe guess that could be the case with the handling of this, because, it's propped up with tax dollars that we all pay, and this seems like a pretty important thing. The CDC even refused when Ebola was reportedly on labels.
Local officials who had previously not thoroughly investigated several of the freezers for fear of encountering a dangerous pathogen made a shocking discovery. A freezer labeled Ebola, filled with sealed silver bags consistent with how the Reedley Biolab operator stored sensitive biological materials. Ebola has a 25 to 90% lethality rate. The CDC did not find this freezer in its search.
The CDC just left Reedley. Good to see our fucking tax dollars put to good use, man. Maybe it's because the samples didn't say Ebola and just the refrigerator said Ebola that had samples in it. That's probably what it was. Maybe they're just fucking lazy and they didn't want to do any tests on what would eventually become 40 large, look at these things, large trash cans full of shit, full of hazardous shit. They're like, we don't want any of that. Maybe I do feel bad for them. Maybe I do understand where they're coming from. No, I don't. Local officials, needless to say, kept on pressing the CDC, and they responded by saying that it's not legal for the CDC to test any sample that is not expressly labeled.
When confronted with this fact over email, and the absence of Ebola noted in its report, the CDC still said it was not a concern unless the packages themselves were labeled Ebola and would not merit testing before destruction of the evidence. No one will ever know how many answers were destroyed based on the CDC's inaction.
And in fact, Reedley's city manager, Nicole Ziba, revealed the fact that the lab had moved repeatedly in Reedley.
How have they been able to open and reopen multiple times?
Well, boy, that would be a great question for our state and federal government and the loopholes that we have right now for completely privately funded labs. And this is a big deal. We need folks on both sides of the aisle in Congress to realize a lab like this could be in their backyards right now. Now, I'll say for my little town of 25,000 in agricultural, rural Central California, I am so proud that we took this lab down.
Here's a timeline from a news story that we stole. It started back in 2015. And moved it a couple times. They had some trouble. A little bit of bankruptcy. Classic American dream business right there, guys. We've set the stage a little bit. How the f was this lab able to squeak by under the radar for so long? That's the question that I want answers to. It's an uninhabited warehouse that is just doing illegal shit. Who's, why, what is, huh? It's not a meth lab. They're testing pathogens on animals? That seems kind of cringe. What's the purpose? Now, How about the little fella behind the curtain pulling the strings like Stromboli? All right, how about that? Jesse. A fellow by the name of Jesse Remarks, aka Jaibe Ju, was the individual that was in charge of the Reedley Biolab. It's this guy, Jaibe Ju. We'll just go ahead and call him Jesse. This fella operated the biolab through another corporation known as UMI, or Universal Meditech Incorporated. Mr. Jesse was quite the businessman.
Our investigation revealed a complex connection between the Reedley Biolab's owner and founder, Jaibe Jesse Ju, and the government of the People's Republic of China.
Except for the fact that he is a PRC citizen and a wanted criminal in Canada. Not that nice of a guy. Little side note, if we talk about a fella named David He, we're also still talking about Jesse. That's his fake identity. That's the name that he assumed.
Ju then appeared to have entered the U.S. illegally and operated under the false alias David He. Upon entering the United States, he set up a new network of biotech companies with the same PRC national board members, acquired thousands of vials of biological substances, pathogens, medical devices, and equipment found later at the clandestine biolab site in Reedley.
How did he get in America? Well, he got in America by using his fake name, David He, because it's so easy to get in America. Jesse is the subject of a $333 million judgment in Canada for stealing American intellectual property.
Ju is a PRC citizen who served as a corporate officer on military civil fusion organizations within the PRC and private organizations affiliated with or partially controlled by the PRC government. Well, in these roles, he traveled to Canada and formed dozens of companies there that engaged in massive theft of American intellectual property from a company, resulting in a $330 million Canadian court judgment against Ju and his co-conspirators in 2016.
And why the fuck does Canada have a $330 million judgment against this guy and he's just able to, what? How does that even work? And what did he steal? Minecraft? It is hilarious to me that he's wanted in Canada, has a $330 million judgment for stealing American IP, and he can, not the US government for stealing American IP, but he can just get away with that by coming to America? Thanks, I didn't know we had shooters up there. I mean, thank you, Canada. Holy f. Jesse was living back in China in the early 2000s, and during this time was the vice chairman of a state-controlled enterprise. Most enterprises in the PRC are state-controlled enterprises, especially in the medical industry, but like, it's a little bit worse. It was the Henan Pioneer Aid Biological Engineering Company Limited, aka Pioneer Aid China for short. This guy also served as a chairman on the Aid Modern Cattle Industry Company Limited Chinese version pathological engineering campaign board. He was a chairman of the board there and a general manager for that company. Additionally, for this company, the cattle industry one of the directors for this company was an executive for a PRC defense firm. It even shows the percentage of government ownership on this little thing. Isn't that kind of crazy? 1%, 1.4%. You know how much of the American government owns sourboys.com? Zero. All right, zero. Just kidding. I'm sure you could argue something in terms of the taxes I pay or whatever, because I do pay my taxes. This guy, Jesse, though, was a very fraudulent guy. He was always moving money between his companies and the companies that he was involved with. IND Group, another company that he created, would even set up a loan plan for UMI, his biolab company, for the total of $240,000. This shit is a fucking incomprehensible, cross-contaminated, messy-ass spider web of businesses that he's involved with and how it's awesome. It's really cool. It's quite a smokescreen. So I think we've established why this is bad for the people of Reedley and why it's kind of dumb. You know, the CDC dropping the ball, local government dropping the ball. Classic! But it's actually f***ing insane that there isn't more coverage of this situation like there should be. To me, personally, just a random guy in Texas, it's kind of terrifying that there is an illegal PRC ran biolab in the middle of California containing f***ing Ebola, malaria, HIV. What? That's scary. Why was this going on? What else did they have? What were the samples that were coded? This rabbit hole is f***ing insane. And then you pair that with the refusal of the CDC to test anything because it's not their authority. How about ask for the f***ing authority to do that instead of all the other shit? All right? Instead of all the other shit that's less important. Because there's got to be stuff that's less important than this. This is pretty important. I mentioned lab equipment. I also mentioned packaging equipment that was present in the warehouse. Now, why would they have packaging equipment in an illegal PRC ran warehouse? What possibly could you know, what purpose could that equipment serve? Well, Jesse aka David, aka Ad Jesse Remarks. He was purchasing counterfeit test kits in the PRC and then reselling them here in the United States. Test kits for pretty much everything you'd expect. Things that you test for. Drug tests, pregnancy tests, COVID-19 tests, everything that's popular. He checked all the boxes. The labels for these resold kits were marked as made in the USA. This guy's a f***ing scammer.
Zhu turned to an accountant tied to entities associated with the CCP's United Front Work Department. Meanwhile, under the auspices of these companies, Zhu purchased cheap or counterfeit test kits for COVID tests, pregnancy, ovulation, and nutritional deficiencies from the PRC, resold them to Americans as made in USA at a steep markup. None of these relatively straightforward fraudulent activities required the medical equipment, transgenic mice, pathogens, or other biological substances found at the biolab. And keeping these materials were extremely expensive, requiring large warehouses and specialized equipment.
Bit of an asshole, this guy Jesse. Now, why is this important? I don't really know. There's no clear link between the purpose of having transgenic mice, pathogens, lab equipment, and also packaging equipment to package and scam people with test kits that are bought from China to resell in the US. There are two seemingly separate operating entities in this uninhabited lab. So what's the situation like now? We're at the end of 2022. Now we're halfway through 2024. Has Jesse been arrested? Yes, he has. But not for running an illegal biolab, but for manufacturing and distributing misbranded medical devices. Crap!
October 18th, 2023, federal agents of the Food and Drug Administration arrested Zhu pursuant to a federal criminal complaint. The complaint alleged that Zhu sold counterfeit or otherwise misbranded test kits and made false statements to federal agents.
They got him for the fraud he committed, not for the animal abuse or treatment of mice in the lab or the possession of incredibly dangerous transmissible pathogens or potentially being a bioterrorist or the cocaine, meth, like none of that stuff, but for selling fake COVID tests. He was quite literally arrested for making false statements to the FDA. They got Jesse, they nabbed him, they got him, he's gone forever. And it looks like they whooped his ass on the way in there. He looks a little beaten up. But that being said, it doesn't seem like they're gonna do much investigating into this thing because most of the samples were unlabeled and the ones that were labeled are samples of pathogens that are more dangerous to individuals as opposed to communities. So it's not as much of a bioterrorism risk. But, you know, what about the ones that were unlabeled or the coded ones? I don't know. It seems like maybe there was a reason that they did that. I'm not sure. Just basic logic I'm using there. The risks of the biolab at this point are unknowable. And it's been 2 years. Nobody's died, so I think we're good. Good call, CDC. Once again, it falls back to the logic of the bioterrorist who just removes the label from his plague. I don't know, dude. You can infect someone. It's okay, guys. You can infect somebody with malaria, Ebola, and tuberculosis because it's not a high risk mass casualty event. It's fine. You just take the label off of the anthrax. All right, you take that off, you're fine, you're good. All in all, to me, it seems absurd that this is just kind of allowed to happen and then there's just a total inaction from a government agency that the purpose of its existence you think would be to prevent things like this from happening. But no, it's like the logic of, I just take the label off. No longer, we don't have any more problems. All right, guys? Hey, man, maybe you don't deserve to be funded. How about that? Hey, man, maybe my tax dollars should go to something else, man. How about that? And in spite of all this, which is public information, there has not been any legislation passed to prevent things like this from happening in the future. Maybe it's because they're illegal, potentially. It's already all illegal. But like, how do you prevent this? I don't know. Maybe don't let people who have vested interests in our foreign adversaries own biolabs. You know, I know the government doesn't like TikTok having any kind of influence on Americans, but what about illegal biolabs? That's what I want to know about. Maybe instead of TikTok, we should ban this. At the end of it all, the United States has no safeguards against hidden or illegal biolabs operating within our borders, and that is shown case in point with this situation. They don't fucking care. We have the CDC. Hey, guess what? They don't fucking care. All right?
This investigation raises troubling questions about the state of our nation's biosecurity. How did a wanted man like Zhu operate clandestine biolabs in Reedley and other locations for years while avoiding detection? Why do present laws allow private, and in this case, wholly illegal laboratories, like the one in Reedley, to purchase deadly pathogens from American laboratories without scrutiny? How did the CDC and the federal government so fundamentally fail this local community? Why did the CDC refuse to test the pathogens before their court-ordered destruction? The investigation into Reedley Biolab shows that competent and driven local public servants like Jessalyn Harper and City Manager Nicole Ziba can do great things in the service of their community. It also shows, however, that our nation is fundamentally vulnerable to pathogenic risk.
Thank you to Jessalyn, the person who discovered the hose, who investigated it and shut this down, because who fucking knows what would have happened if that wasn't the case. It was only there for a little short while after they went bankrupt and moved locations. But the US currently doesn't conduct any real oversight of privately funded research, including the enhancement of potential pandemic pathogens. Something needs to fucking change.